It starts with a simple question and ends in objective reality. Through our journey from there to here, we find one another and ourselves. And as the next 24 hours breaks free from our last, we gaze onward in reflection of the day.
Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.
Welcome to the Daily Wrap-Up.
Friday, March 13th, 2026. Thank you for joining me today. Hey, Friday the 13th. Well, I got a special co-host joining me today to discuss some Epstein smuggling network conversation that I'm very excited to get to, talk about some Iran conversation, Marines deployed, but a lot to get to with Whitney Webb here to discuss the in-depth part of all of it. How are you? Good to have you back.
Hey, doing good, Ryan. Your intro is cool.
Oh, thank you. I really do want to just shout. He doesn't want me to say his name. He's just a fan, like a follower like the rest, but reached out and said he does editing, and he's
did a
made
good job.
IMA. He's made the IMA one. He's very talented, and it's just honored to have somebody like that who cares about the show. But yeah, I love that new intro. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you back on. There's so many different things we can get into. One thing I wanted to start with was announcing something that we are going to be doing on Unlimited Hangout. And so I didn't know if you wanted to discuss that.
Oh, sure. Yeah, well, members of Unlimited Hangout already know, but we're going to be moving a little more into video because unfortunately a lot of people don't read as much. Yeah, so anyway, not only am I going to be doing a video show for people that don't want to read my articles. It's sad, but true. I don't know, just reality, I guess. But also you, Ryan, along with Derek Bros of the Conscious Resistance, will be doing a show for Unlimited Hangout as well. And we'll have more to say about that in the next few weeks.
I'm looking forward to it too. It'll be, as kind of a evaluation review of some of the written form articles, which I think is very important because it's sad that people don't read as much. But I also think there's a lot of people out there that even though they do read, it's about digesting the information. And you hear this as well, because there's so much information. I get the same criticism, or rather just statement about the work that I do on these long form shows where it's difficult for people to absorb it all. So this will be a way to sort of help people try to digest the different important parts and go through it all. So I'm really looking forward to it. It's going to be a good show.
Us too.
Yeah, nice. Well, let's start with one thing that I wanted to kind of just discuss and address, sort of like just setting the table for this point. There's so many other angles we could tie into it, but before the selection process, we had really, as we've discussed many times already, kind of the foundation of why the IMA was started. As you kind of came to me and say you saw what was building, and kind of developed into this idea of something that we needed to come together to I guess fight against, resist, and whatever we saw coming. And that was just about nonpartisan, objective coverage. And ultimately it became labeled black pilled or purity test and all this interesting. Yeah. Now, all this time later, almost every single thing that we were worried about discussing is where we are. And it's not about necessarily going, victory lap point. It's just about acknowledging that this stuff was easy to see then. And it's about recognizing who didn't really call that out. And so one thing I wanted to highlight was a tweet that you had shared back then. It's interesting time. He was just recently on Tucker Carlson, as I understand it. You wrote in 2024, one thing I've learned this election cycle is that a lot of people who have claimed to be anarchists or anti-state, were really just waiting for the right king to come along. And Brett Weinstein says, you're not even close. Interesting. Just what are your thoughts about that and where we are now?
Well, I mean, you could pull up more than one Brett Weinstein tweet shitting on me for not joining the emotional wave of hopium that brought Trump to win as you called it, the selection process in 2024. And yeah, to piggyback off of the point you brought up about the IMA, I noticed that those narratives were getting really pervasive, and a lot of the attacks about reasoned political arguments, such as Trump was in power previously. Perhaps we should go back and see what he did when he was office last time, because he's likely to repeat those things. Because also in previous that election before his first term, he made many campaign promises that he did not keep. Thus, it's very possible that he may not keep them again, and that he will instead repeat or expand on the actions he did in his first term, which included, for example, try and start a war with Iran by blowing up Qasem Soleimani when he was on a diplomatic mission in another country. So, oh, and allegedly that was, for partially motivated by religious reasons on the part of Kushner, and also Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence and that crowd that was around Trump in the first administration. Have times really changed? I don't know. So anyway, I considered that a rational argument and a call to caution about riding on this this emotional wave of hopium that was very similar to what happened back when Obama was elected for the left. It was the right-leaning version of that. And also bringing in independents who were interested in the promises of the Make America Healthy Again movement and trying to fold them into this coalition. And so, honestly, what I've noticed, and there were a few people that noticed this why it was happening, is that during the COVID era, you had a lot of quote unquote dissidents pop up who had, like Brett Weinstein, initially advocated for mask wearing, or in the case of people like Michael Schellenberger, advocated hysterically for lockdowns. And then they get promoted as these sort of dissident figures in the immediate after 2020, I guess, in that interim, and are sort of elevated, and then they push everyone into voting for Trump. And there were terrible signs, I think, of this push, in the sense that it was allowing the neoconservatives to rebrand, because you had neoconservatives, like notorious neocons like Frank Gaffney, for example, became a stop vaccine passport guy toward the end of COVID. And so I think it's not a coincidence that these things were happening, and that they were trying to seep their way into these movements. And then, the ultimate goal was to direct people towards Trump, who claims not to be a neocon, but quite clearly is a neocon.
Right.
It couldn't be more obvious. And so a lot of commentators, I think, there's obviously people who were paid, but I think there's people that were really emotionally attached to the outcome they wanted to see and can't admit they were wrong. You have people in that camp that will continue inventing and spinning, just spinning yarn to never be wrong about anything. I call it it's the Tom DeLongo model. But there's a lot of other people that have sort of taken that in different ways and refused to admit that they were ever wrong about anything. And I think Brett Weinstein probably falls in that category. He and Walter Kern basically dogpiled me on Twitter, complaining that I didn't like Trump and didn't see that, that this belief that it was going to be some sort of like superhero riding in and saving civilization and immediately erasing all of our problems. Frankly, feeding that narrative to your followers was insanely detached from reality. And you should take some heat for that, because it frankly, it was irresponsible of you to promote it. And the fact that, Brett Weinstein, you can see pictures of him around with like the bandana on his face. This is how I wear my mask and blah, blah, blah. And early COVID, these are people that when the crisis hits and things are very, events come fast and heavy. I don't think you can turn to these people for a rational analysis of what's going on, because they're very easily taken by the emotional propaganda and marketing of these events. And so he's done that. He did that with COVID, and then pivoted later when it was convenient and in some cases fashionable to do so. In branding yourself as quote unquote anti-establishment, and then you funnel people towards Trump, and here we are. And so maybe you have buyer's remorse now, like you did about promoting masks during COVID, but I don't know. I think people should wisen up and follow people like those of us in the IMA and others beyond that, who have not fallen for those traps.
And I think what we were talking about beforehand, which is an important point to add right there, is that like you rightly pointed out, a lot of these people came in, and I should state before I even say this, that I'm all for people changing their minds, becoming aware of something, no matter how bad a track record, genuinely be seeing a thing and addressing the truth. We all should be for that.
Yeah,
But
sorry, I didn't mean to
No.
say that that's bad. Just that
No,
he was very arrogant about.
Yeah. You didn't at all. I'm just setting up my point. You said you framed that very well. My point is that, and we both agree, we want that to happen. The difference here is that during the COVID-19 timeframe, there was a lot of, it was obvious there were people that were either buying it or selling the lie. And at the end, a lot of those people came around to start telling what we always were saying. Now, again, the point is some of them may have just seen it. That's good. The difference is, as you pointed out, when there came like the next big thing we're involved with, let's say Trump in the selection process, those people immediately fell back in and started pushing for the mainstream narrative. So now again, and this is the point I'm getting to, we were talking before, suddenly we have this new conversation with Iran and Israel. And these, as you were highlighting, some of the same figures are suddenly starting to do the same thing. Now, when it's difficult, now is the time.
Well, they're jumping ship because it could threaten their audience numbers at this point.
That's exactly. Yeah. And this is the bigger point, is that these people, whether it's just profiteering or trying to promote their own show,
I think
why suddenly do this when it's in their interest, not when it's most important to call it out. And you were saying you see this happen.
Well, I think the people that were most motivated about audience, you could really see that during the 2024 campaigns, because there was this emotional wave. And people that were critical of it, like you and myself and others, were referred to as black-pilled and basically negative Nancy's. Don't listen to them. They'll make you feel sad and bad. Listen to us. We'll make you feel good with all these false promises of how Trump's going to come in and be daddy government and save everything for you. And let's shoo away all those negative Nancy's. We don't need them here. It's kind of ridiculous. It was an insidious, frankly, because people during COVID, a lot of those audiences really saw that something was seriously wrong. Right. And instead of doing anything that could have changed that, they were told the only way to change that is in the ballot box between two political parties that are fundamentally controlled by the same forces. And that is the only way to resolve things. And anyone that offers any other solutions is a black-pilled nincompoop, and they need to go be shut in the closet. I mean, it was just ridiculous.
Yeah. And clearly, the main point overall, I think, is that there are people that do this maliciously, right? That intentionally side up next to something that people are already starting to see after the difficult part is over. We were the ones chopping it down. A lot of people, out there with the machete, hacking down the hard parts, and they step over the top and go, hey, the big story. And that happens every time. And it's malicious.
Sure. I mean, in that period of time, I had tons of people take my work.
Yeah, exactly.
And you basically pair bonded themselves with my work or my books to promote themselves and build trust with an audience. And then because I wasn't directing people towards Trump, they directed people towards Trump.
Right. And and the reason this is important, not just to recognize that there are people that, that don't fail to acknowledge their past mistakes or continue to do that, but it's where we are now, right? Because now we're in this position where some of those same people are very hypercritical of Trump. And, maybe genuinely, maybe not. But the point is to recognize where we are now as this drifts into another war. All the promises of Maha or MAGA are being challenged. And this is important to see, because I believe all of this is coming together for a very clear purpose. But so on that general idea, where do you feel like a lot of this is going? Is this just another administration profiteering? Or do you feel there's a larger agenda in kind of what's happening right now?
You mean where the Trump administration is taking us? Well, I think the best summary of it is to look at the big tech Silicon Valley oligarchs that installed themselves in very insidious ways in the levers of power via this administration. And probably the best thing you can do to learn about them is to buy Ian Davis's new book, The Technocratic Dark State, or, borrow a copy from someone else who bought it. Or it is the best, most forensic breakdown of those people and what their interests are and what they are doing. And you can read some of Ian Davis's articles about aspects of that. For example, he did an amazing investigation into the city states sort of this idea of the network state and all of that, and how it's just as bad as the globalist global governance that a lot of people in right-leaning conspiracy, quote unquote, conspiracy world are worried about. It's that on steroids and is being marketed to those people as the solution. And a lot of these people are overt transhumanists. I mean, they call themselves techno-optimists. Again, sort of a play on that same thing we were just talking about in the Trump era, where like, we're the optimist and avoid the negative Nancys. Feel good with us. They'll just make you feel bad. And it's all about feeling, not about facts. Yeah. So, I mean, there's obviously a lot of other agendas at play too, but I think obviously it's pretty clear that in the Trump administration, there's going to be some type of big switcheroo economically. And we will see the rise of, stable coins, the Bitcoin dollar system as laid out by Mark Goodwin back in 2021. But I mean, that has definitely played out. And so I think, a lot of that stuff with digital currency is going to advance. And then we're going to be herded further into sort of this techno-feudal reality. And then at the same time, you have, these other aspects of the Trump administration at work that have, this very deep set, feeling about eschatology. Like, there's an overlap, actually, if you look at people like Peter Thiel, who's, the person who basically created J.D. Vance in a lab, and his obsession with the Antichrist and all of this stuff. A lot of these people are obsessed with end times things. There's been plenty of people pointing out recently how this has influenced, likely, the current war with Iran. So, there's obviously a lot of different angles to talk about, but basically, this is not fighting against global governance and global tyranny. This is going to be a furtherance of the same thing that every administration, whether Democratic or Republican, has advanced since 9/11, and obviously before that too. But they sped it up. The type of gradualism that they practice increased significantly after that point. And the goal was to create, an AI-powered surveillance state that is authoritarian in nature and neo-feudal economically. And the vast majority of us are meant to be serfs. Or rather, if you want to use the Yuval Noah Harari phrasing, we will become the exploited because it's better than being expendable. So, Trump works for bankers. Big surprise. They all work for bankers. And these banker, cronies, what they do is they steal your money and they use your tax dollars to build your prison. So, I mean, I don't really anticipate seeing anything beyond that at this point. And so people that have been going back, looking either at my work on Epstein or work on other stuff and being like, wow, she was so early. Like, okay, if I have this track record now of like working for 10 years and I've been early on multiple big stories, maybe you should look at what I'm talking about now. And like, not just me, obviously, but what a lot of people are talking about now, that we're right on a lot of those things too.
Yeah. Well, on that point, and this is something that I see connected to a lot of this, as you mentioned, the network state agenda and the per nomos capital funding mechanism. Do you see what you just described as the Great Reset, or maybe just there's
a lot of different ways to phrase it. So it's not, there's been catchphrases that have been used to sum this up. The Great Reset, build back better. I don't know. There's been several phrases that were cooked up in PR labs that have been thrown around. And have become infamous at their times and then forgotten about later. But basically, I mean,
same agenda.
Yeah, I would argue that, because I mean, what was the Great Reset nominally about per the World Economic Forum? It was about leading the world into the fourth industrial revolution, which is overtly transhumanist. It's overtly powered by AI, and it's overtly surveillance state centric to keep us safe.
I just think that's really important for the average, like, partisan, there's in the partisan conversation, there's a lot of people that I think, in my opinion, are starting to see some of these bigger questions that are making them question this system, but they're still identify as sort of a partisan perspective. And I think that's important to understand, is that it's not one side or the other, but the entirety of our government, if not way beyond that that's actually trying to initiate this through the partisan angle. And as always, they use the other side to convince you that this is somehow the answer to the other. So, you know, I see the same way.
Well, yeah,
the new
they always do that. I mean, please figure out that ping pong is happening,
right,
and that we need to get out of the, you know, the pinball machine or whatever and stop being flung around. I mean, it's ridiculous. We have to do something different at some point, or this will just keep happening, and then things will just get progressively worse. And we'll be arguing about, you know, whether Brett Weinstein was right in 2028 or not, or something.
Well,
No,
you know,
thanks.
the problem, I think the obvious point, and like Catherine control grid discussion, same as yourself, is that this becomes the point to make that never possible again. You know, and a new, you know, reimagining our society so we're in a place where that's like functionally not even possible anymore with the way that's designed. And, you know, not a new opinion, but it's important to think about where that's going, because I believe it's a reaction to people waking up to a lot of this stuff, and in ways that I've never, at least levels to which I've never seen before, in my opinion, you know. And I think that's a lot because of Epstein and the awareness around that. So let's touch on that and include that with your recent part 3 of a good series, this article. First Friends, how Andrew Farkas and Emirati Sultan helped Epstein build a smuggler's paradise. And so this, for just any general points on that connection between like the Epstein network, but let's get into this and tell people why this is a connection to the larger point about Epstein and you're talking
sorry, you wanted me to make a point about something aside from the article?
I think I was just giving the opening to, if you wanted to make a comment about something outside that article in relation to what we were just saying, go ahead. Otherwise, let's get into the article.
Well, yeah. So just like there was this effort in 2024 to like build trust and then misdirect. I mean, people need to be very aware that can easily happen again, especially with all of the eyeballs on, you know, the Epstein case. Once again, there have obviously been people, as there's been this new wave of interest in the case. There have been experts that have popped up that, you know, have now built followings around Epstein material, even though previously not covering the case. And that's not to say that new people can't crop up and do a good job. My point is, pay attention to those people and where they try and lead you into what solutions they try and lead you, and think critically, because that is always in short supply in the world today. And we should all practice more of it.
Well, quick question, and then before we get to the article, then just on the general flow. I mean, do you feel like this was a net positive with what's happened? I mean, I think it's clear that they're obviously dragging their feet and hiding things. That's my opinion. But do you think it was a net positive what they've done so far through the Trump administration?
You mean how the Trump administration has handled the releases?
I mean, let's just say clearly the information, whether they wanted it to or not, that has come out.
Well, they were legally required to release some of it. So yeah, they released some. It's based largely around a single email address, jeevacation@gmail.com. And I believe Drop Site News, which is mostly former Intercept writers, as I understand it, received Epstein emails from a separate address that they reported on at the end of last year. So as far as the US government is concerned, it's been one email address. Obviously, Epstein had several. And I think, because I mean, Vacation, it's pretty clear that most of these emails, he used that email address mainly when he was present in the USVI. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, which was his primary base after 2009. But obviously before then it was not. So it probably won't have the full extent of communications from that previous point in time. And so obviously in that case, the focus is mostly going to be on emails from 2009 up until 2019. So a 10-year window into Epstein's activities. Obviously not all of them, because there's been lots of redactions. And even mainstream outlets like Britain's Channel 4, they're like, this is 2% of what the US government has on Epstein. Right. So if British media is, I mean, it's just like, they're obviously not going to release all of the files. I mean, you remember that ridiculous op they did with the people coming out with the binders and being like, we have the documents. and it's literally stuff that they had like already released years prior. You know, they didn't want to release all of it, but they released some of it. And it's very clear from the redactions they were trying to cover up for powerful people. So one of those powerful people who was redacted was sort of found out because it was this person who Epstein emailed, and he was like, "Where are you? Are you okay? I loved the torture video."
Right.
And then people were like, "Why is the person who sent the torture video to Epstein's name redacted?" And then Thomas Massey goes and finds out that it's a sultan.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And then then it was, Todd Blanche, who's deputy attorney general, had to basically say, oh, it was this guy, who's Sultan bin Sulayem. He was the longtime head of Dubai Ports World, which later became Dubai World. But before that, he was managing all of the special economic zones in the UAE and their port system, which in the 1980s, in particular, when he was coinciding with when he became chair of their biggest SEZ port and free trade zone, became a hotbed for illegal smuggling, including of weapons and diamonds and all sorts of things. And so if you're familiar with my work on Epstein and have read my books, Epstein was, started off his entrance into this, sort of murky world that he is now notorious for inhabiting, began after he left Bear Stearns in 1981 or so. And he basically became a smuggler, not just, or a trafficker, you could say, but it wasn't, minors and women at that point. It was weapons mainly. But there's this new documents have come out that have shown that he was investigated by the Drug Enforcement Agency for allegedly trafficking or being involved in trafficking networks that were moving ecstasy and club drugs around the United States, which is really interesting because I remember a Media Roots radio episode years ago about Mossad trafficking ecstasy all through the U.S. in that period of time that Robbie Martin did. So might have to go back and revisit that now. But interesting, the overlap. So but anyway, in the 1980s, he was mainly trafficking weapons, and he was also doing a lot of shady financial shit, which had gotten him in trouble at Bear Stearns anyway, and why they had to let him go. At least the most likely explanation. If you look into it, there's like 6 different explanations from different people, but the most believable one is that. And so, later, Robert Maxwell dies, and he teams up with Ghislaine Maxwell and takes over part of the Maxwell of the Robert Maxwell portfolio, quite obviously. And so he's also involved, I have argued, with the smuggling and trafficking of weapons through the 1990s, but he was also getting involved through his connection to Leslie Wexner by using modeling as a lure to traffic women, mainly from Eastern Europe and also Brazil, to high-end clientele. And as I note in this First Friend series and the previous 2 installments to this one, Epstein was clearly doing this as part of a broader network that didn't just involve him and Jean-Luc Brunel of MC2. One of the people involved with MC2 was a top, the head of elite models in Europe named Gerard Marie, who's been accused of terrible crimes by a litany of former models that worked for him. His former wife believes them. She's like, yeah, that sounds about right. He was never prosecuted. He's French, if you couldn't tell by the name. And so there's a big unexplored angle of Epstein's network in France. The investigation there pretty much died when Jean-Luc Brunel died in a French prison. And it hasn't been explored. And, there's also a whole Italian angle to this that I talk about in my first piece and also my second piece. They're both about, Italians, Italian Americans, but they're also involved with elite models. And more broadly speaking, what was going on with elite models also, it ties a decent bit into Trump as well, who used to hold elite model look of the year contest at the Plaza Hotel when he owned it. And, there's a lot more detail I get into, but I don't want to get lost in the weeds. But if you read those articles, it becomes pretty clear that this is at least the model model as a lure trafficking pipeline was much bigger than just Epstein and Jean-Luc Brunel. It involved these people as well. And there's been also hardly any scrutiny of what they were doing in Brazil. A lot of women were coming from there. How many Epstein victims do you know that are named, that are that come out and talk about having been trafficked by Epstein? Where are the Brazilians? Where are the Eastern Europeans? The vast majority of the women that were trafficked by him were of those nationalities. Most of the ones we know are, not all obviously, but most of the ones we know are Americans that got wrapped up in it. But it was much larger. It was large in size, and it's obviously a much larger network than beyond just Epstein. And Epstein, as I said, continued his, these smuggling activities in the 90s, probably into the early 2000s. And he was also, a master at moving around money. So you don't call it money trafficking when you're moving money between illegal and illegal institutions. But I mean, that's basically what he was doing too, as a way to create tax havens for powerful people and prevent them from paying taxes. So obviously, I think an important piece of legislation I would like to see passed is Ron Wyden's act that's about releasing all of the Treasury records about Epstein.
Yeah.
That would show a lot of the money flows involved there, but I do not see that passing. I would love for it to pass, though. I would love those records, because also we know now that Epstein was advising the Treasury. I mean, it was actually reported in 2019, and so Mark Goodwin's in my series about a lot of the Epstein network connections to the crypto industry. The chain touch on that. But, in the recent documents, there's like pictures of Epstein's U.S. Treasury badge. I mean, he was involved. Yeah, he was very involved. And it's important to point out, because he was very involved with the debt crisis in 2008. Debt is routinely used as a financial weapon against other countries. He was a big foreign currency trader. The currency traders have destroyed entire economies and wrecked them for the benefit of the powers that be. So Epstein was clearly, he wore many hats, but he was also doing this kind of financial hitman activity as well. And he's not alone in that either. So, as a good example, he was close. One of the first people that brought him into sort of these elite circles was Jimmy Goldsmith, who was called by the New York Times part of this cabal of currency traders that were basically destroying economies around the world. He was hanging out with Goldsmith at least as early as the early 1970s, when he was like recent college dropout. That doesn't make a lot of sense, does it?
Well,
so beyond that, another person that was named as being part of this cabal was Joe Lewis, who was recently pardoned by Trump after admitting to insider trading. And Jimmy Goldsmith and Lewis have ties to, I guess everyone's going to be surprised now, the Rothschild family. And the Rothschild Epstein connection, if you had read my books, would not be surprising. They came out in 2022. I wrote extensively about how Robert Maxwell literally came to the U.S. on the behalf of Rothschild's banking interests to be a corporate raider, so that Rothschild Inc. on Wall Street could build its mergers and acquisitions business. It's like they openly talked about it, and it was Robert Maxwell and Jimmy Goldsmith that they picked.
Lots of new bombshells today that are suddenly, that were out there in your books or otherwise. It's just funny how that's the new media today. But,
it's okay. I mean, I'm glad the information's out there, but I also don't want it to be misdirected or turned into Q-ish adjacent stuff. I mean, this is real and verifiable, and not Looney Tune town or whatever, as some people might want to paint it. I mean, it's a very real connection. And it's very important to note that and discuss, because the big takeaway from this series and all of my Epstein work really is that Epstein was middle management working on behalf of a tight-knit network of oligarchs. And the oligarchs are unaccountable. Nothing's going to happen to Leslie Wexner. And actually, Mark Goodwin and I have an article coming up for Unlimited Hangout, hopefully next week, that will show you exactly how nothing has happened to Leslie Wexner so extensively that his master plan he's been making since the 1980s has basically come to fruition in the state of Ohio. It's messed up. It's very messed up. So, sorry, I'll let you.
No, go ahead. I don't want to keep going. I just want to, it's important. I think that this is obvious, I think, to most people. And that's what I'm curious that, that's why I feel like it's, even though they tried to not let this happen, drag their feet, lied about it, it is having a positive effect that people are seeing it more, changing opinions, I think, grudgingly for them. I think that's worth pointing out. I wanted to ask about the previous point you were highlighting there, so weapons and other smuggling sides of this. So obviously that's the intelligence side of that, you would argue. Is that connected to the sort of, regime change element? And like, do you feel that plays a factor in potentially what we're discussing today?
What do you mean? Well, so I don't really know if I can say if Epstein was necessarily involved in any regime changes.
I just mean the practice of the smuggling of weapons, for example. And
oh, sure.
Of that
so specifically with Epstein, a lot of it seemed to have been that he was involved in moving weapons, specifically to the Afghanistan Mujahideen, by way of Iraq. And also apparently, I think, arming Iraq to an extent as well. This is, of course, ongoing with the Iran and the Iraq war, when you had U.S. and Israeli intelligence via the Iran-Contra operation really arm both sides of that conflict with the intent of having Iran and Iraq weaken each other. And then a lot of the weapons we gave Iraq, or the U.S. gave Iraq in that era, were then used as justification years later by Bush Jr., W. Bush, to go in and invade Iraq. Oh, the WMDs. Well, actually, some of those WMDs that were, fear-mongered about, like anthrax among them, were actually given to Saddam Hussein in the 1980s from the U.S. And it was Donald Rumsfeld, oddly enough, that was the envoy, point man for all of that. So historical patterns matter here, because these people are not very creative and they do a lot of the same stuff over history over and over again. So, maybe the reason some of us are right about these stories early is because we pay attention.
Well, that's often what I point about, even just like the week to week stuff that I do on the show. It's evidence there. It's not hard. You look at their past actions, you consider what they typically do, what they might be doing, and what their interests are, their agenda, who profits. It's not that difficult. We're not always right, but the point is that in many cases, it's anybody who's being honest and sort of nonpartisan would be able to see the same. And I think we saw that a lot with a lot of these recent sort of whether like the ICE discussions, for example, or just things that were, it's like starting the conversation that we're, since we're on Mars, and it's like, well, hold on, that's just flatly not true. And that kind of ridiculously, but people engage with it and it becomes the talking point. But that's kind of,
There's a great example of that recently, where there were these tweets that got like a huge engagement going around, claiming that Tulsi Gabbard's going to hire Julian Assange as a national security advisor. I'm like, Trump tried to kill Assange. What are you talking about?
It's crazy to reach those things.
That would never happen, but it gets a huge reach. There's no sources cited. It's just breaking, and it's more hopium. Oh, Trump is actually against the deep state so much that he's going to hire the truth teller guy he tried to have murdered by the CIA.
Well, it's just sad that, thanks Twitter files for the whole screenshot is evidence today reality, but that's obvious.
Yeah. Well, they hated what WikiLeaks did in 2016. And so they made sure through various, I would argue, successive ops to bastardize what national security leak reporting is in the United States in the public imagination, and the Twitter files was the nail in the coffin for that. And what do you know? I think it's very interesting to look at the trajectory of the Twitter files journalists since then.
Right. One of them already.
What a ride it's been.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the same as the binder for Epstein, most transparent. There's got to be some accountability here, especially when it's that quick of change. Suddenly we're weeks later and it's already clear that wasn't true. People need to be called out for these things. It's important. But speaking of calling people out for things, the interesting overlap of Kushner and all of this, which you mentioned in the article we were just highlighting, and the interesting part that just came to play before we touch on some of the Iran parts of this, where. And I was interested to hear your thought on how you feel this played out, with Rubio coming out and essentially saying Israel was going to attack, and so we had to sort of almost say.
Well, more recently, Caroline Leavitt was like, well, Jared Kushner talked to the president and that was it.
Exactly, right? That's where I was going with that. So it's interesting to see how all of a sudden it's become, well, Israel through Kushner sort of pressured us or lied to us or made us, whatever variation of the argument. It's like, we're all like, yes, exactly. That's what we've been trying to show everybody. Whether you think Trump was manipulated or not, which I think he's an active part in this, it came out very clearly that there was an influence mechanism through Witkoff and Kushner, and whether Trump is seeing that or not, I don't know. I was curious where you think
this whole idea that Trump is in charge of what his administration does, I don't agree with at all. I think Trump was chosen because he was a celebrity TV host. It's really interesting, and I really encourage people to read this whole series because you'll see again these historical patterns. The model for the Trump presidency actually happened first in Italy in the 1990s. It was Silvio Berlusconi who framed himself as, I'm a billionaire outsider kind of celebrity now guy, and I'm the billionaire outsider, so I'm going to come in as this outsider and clean up the mess, and I'm going, and I'm going to run the country like a CEO.
Exactly. And
Berlusconi, wait, though. Berlusconi before that provably tied up with organized crime and a member of the P2 Lodge. And if you don't know about what P2 is, it was this Freemasonic lodge that was found out to be engaged in subversive activity involving the CIA, organized crime in the US and Italy, which in my books, I argue the organized crime syndicate we're talking about in all these cases is the Jewish mob and Italian mafia that teamed up in New York, and then the head of the Italian mafia got deported to Italy, and so that's how it becomes the Italian mafia again. And then the Vatican, right? And so Berlusconi came out of that nexus, and his financial success, the reason he was a billionaire was because of that network. They gave him the seed money for his companies. He built himself up that way. This is a mob-made man. Right? Yeah. Involving, intelligence and organized crime, which have fused, the thesis of my book again. So exactly. Berlusconi was the model for that. And then Berlusconi, while he was prime minister, had to leave because he got charged with having sex with minors. And his wife left him because he was surrounding himself with minors. Bunga bunga parties, they were called. So I don't know. Trump is also a man that before being a politician had, organized crime ties, specifically to the Simeon Mogilevich group, which the U.S. mainstream media framed as, a basis for Russiagate reporting for a long time because he's nominally Ukrainian, but he's a big guy in the Russian mob. But Simeon Mogilevich was a key business partner of Robert Maxwell at the time that Donald Trump was partying on Robert Maxwell's yacht, the Lady Ghislaine, and Simeon Mogilevich was able to penetrate the U.S. financial system because Robert Maxwell got him an Israeli passport. So that whole organized crime syndicate, a la Mogilevich, is a transnational one that spans Russia, Israel, and the United States. And that's why the Russiagate reporting never really had anything meaty to grab on, because they left out the Israel part.
Exactly.
And when it touched that. And so it's really, but it's, as I note in this series, the part, how it ties into Berlusconi, it's the same crowd. In Europe, they did Operation Gladio, that nexus P2, which was regime change ops, and wholesale slaughter of European civilians to prevent certain people from getting elected, supposedly to fight the communists, and all of this stuff. But, these are intelligence ops involving the mob that go back a long time. And so the Trump model is really not that different than the Silvio Berlusconi model. And the first two people that I wrote about in this series are close friends of Trump that are also very close to Silvio Berlusconi, and also have important roles in the Epstein network in terms of trafficking. Right. The first one being Flavio Briatore, who was accused by Epstein's former butler of sex trafficking, along with Jean-Luc Brunel, Ghislaine Maxwell, Leslie Wexner, Eva and Glenn Dubin. He has a pretty good track record, honestly. I mean, he's been dead well before Epstein was arrested in 2019, so no one's been able to ask him how he knew. He also said Trump was, he also flagged Trump in that. So, important to keep all of that in mind. And then the other person is Paolo Zampoli, who's the person that introduced Trump and Melania and was a modeling agent. Again, a protege of John Casablancas of Elite Models, and had a lot of overlap with Epstein in the modeling world, and then went on to work for Trump, and then a bunch of shady United Nations buying citizenship stuff, and then Ghislaine Maxwell's Terramar. So this is a transnational network, end of story. And, obviously it involves Israel to a significant degree, but again, it's transnational. So the power structure is above the nation state. Right. So it doesn't begin and end with Israel. But Israel's a key part of it because Israel, has such a huge lobbying presence in the post-World War II era that it's very difficult to criticize them or boycott them. They've made it very difficult to single them out, even when they do terrible things. And I think the transnational mob, or whatever you want to call them, utilizes that to their advantage all the time, because the stuff that's too touchy for them to do in the US or Europe or elsewhere, they'll just have them do it,
Exactly. Well, so how do you see all this tying to the current direction? Well, I'll ask this first. Is the current US government, rather just the Trump administration, but it's the same things from before, current direction, do you see that as a globalist direction with his Board of Peace, with the new WHO proposal? And then how do you see this connecting with, because you mentioned the whole CEO run country point all the way back then, how do you see
that's the technocratic model.
Yeah. How do you see
the techno king idea?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, the running the country as a CEO is pretty close to the technocracy model, and the running the country as a CEO idea, as a private executive. Well, I mean, what a lot of these people in the Curtis Yarvin sphere want is a CEO dictator. I think Curtis Yarvin's pretty open about that. He's hugely influential with JD Vance and Peter Thiel and all of those guys. And so
network state agenda. That's the point.
Yeah, I mean, they don't. I don't think they self-describe it as technocracy, but it's similarity to that movement. Right.
In the book that Srinivasan, from the former CTO from Coinbase, that he describes it verbatim as tech Zionism. That's terrifying to me with what we see in the world today.
That's a new term, and I don't like it at all.
Yeah. It's been picked up by others in the conversation, but it's why that's so important to me, obviously, because I've been talking about it and I'm worried about where that goes. But I'm curious from the internal, it seems like there's a lot of the religious Zionism draw, or rather influence on Trump's inner administration, his administration. Sure. But is that the same, do you think, as the larger sort of Peter Thiel direction? Because I think about that, because I think Israel has its own direction in all this, and I think they may at some point sort of butt heads. I was curious if you had any thoughts on that. Sort of Zionism, Valley Drive.
So to be honest, I think like Peter Thiel's Antichrist stuff, there's an attempt there to rebrand Christianity in ways that are more compatible with Silicon Valley's deep involvement in the U.S. military, which slaughters civilians, and also the Israeli military, which slaughters civilians. And there's sort of a way, an attempt there to develop a new form of a more violent Christianity, which,
Exeth right now.
Most Christians, I would think, would be against. But they're particularly marketing this not necessarily to the general American public, but a select number of people in Silicon Valley, or up and coming people in the technology scene that identify as Christians. So Peter Thiel's Antichrist series, only certain people were invited to that. It was not a publicly broadcast thing. They're not trying to sway the public with that. That's kind of, they're going after a niche group there. And then you have Trey Stevens, who's he's an obvious spook, but he's a very Thiel linked one. Big Palantir guy before that was involved in U.S. intelligence stuff in Afghanistan, but he co-founded Anduril with Palmer Luckey, which is doing a lot of this autonomous warfare stuff. But beyond that, he also created, his wife nominally created, but he clearly runs it with his wife, called Act 17. That's kind of this collective in Silicon Valley about trying to bring Christianity back to Silicon Valley. And it's this particular brand of it.
Interesting. This is terrifying.
So the religious Zionism thing, I think, is a little different if you're talking about what were once an extremist group in Judaism, but obviously it's expanded since then. But I definitely want to make it very clear that I don't think all Jews fall in this category, even remotely. But there is, this particular faction that's very obsessed with hastening the end times. But there's also a group of Christians that's very obsessed with that. And, I wrote about this back for Mint Press, I think in 2019. It's just sort of the history of how that developed on both sides, and the idea that these groups have opportunistically used each other, and they don't necessarily like each other.
Right.
But they opportunistically use each other to try and hasten the same end times, but they think the end times will have different outcomes, obviously.
Exactly.
And actually, the Christian version of that, the Christian Zionist believed outcome of the end times, has been criticized as being deeply anti-Semitic, ironically enough.
Yeah.
But it's basically, for both ends, it's born out of this idea that God isn't acting quickly enough, and so we must do things to hasten the end times, because we don't want to wait, to paraphrase the Schneerson song.
It's blasphemous from any perspective, any religion. What you're doing. So this is,
well, it just assumes that you know better than God does, right? Like that's gone well historically. But these are also the same people that want to like edit the human genome and like put pig organs into people, and are doing all of this crazy stuff in medicine and transhumanism. So I mean, they're like,
right. Many serve as an example of a genetic manipulation stuff, stuff they're doing in Prospera, for example, with no oversight and regulation, longevity stuff, RFK's administration. You can see a lot of this stuff really permeating into this administration, which is one of the reasons why it's so concerning for me, how it all ties together with the foreign policy part of this. And so let's touch on that to end today, how much time we have left, about what's going on with Iran, just from, surface level opinions and about how it ties in with this, or not at all, right? What are your thoughts on whether this is sort of, like we said earlier, is that, Trump being pulled into this because of greater Israel that has maybe nothing to do with the larger conversation? Or do you see, as Catherine discussed last night, this being just like explicitly part of the engineering of the larger control grid for a global sense?
Oh, you're talking about the war in Iran. Where does it fit in?
I thought I said
that.
Yeah, the war.
Yeah, so I mean, sorry.
No, it's okay. That's probably
first interview in a while. Might be a little gonna get things moving again. I don't know. Sorry. Yeah, basically, I mean, just look at Gaza's the template. So just look at what they did to Gaza. They moonscaped it. They committed egregious, terrible war crimes. And the plan, well, let Jared Kushner tell you. Oddly enough, the person I brought up a minute ago, Paolo Zampoli, who was part 2 of my First Friend series, actually was the original person to come up with the whole Gaza Riviera, Mara Gaza idea years ago. Pitched it to Trump. But yeah, it's basically, they openly say it's to turn Gaza into, not just digital ID, but they openly say to have it ruled by a technocratic council.
Exactly. Digital money, the whole thing. It is literally.
Yeah. So it's the ultimate build back better, and Trump is doing it. For all you people in the COVID area that thought Trump wouldn't be in on this, he's using the full power of the U.S. military to murder people so that this can happen and steal their land. Right. So that's probably the goal in Iran, and to another extent too. The U.S. also engineered this in Ukraine. And don't act like Trump wasn't complicit in it, because basically in exchange for U.S. military and European military support, Ukrainian state assets were sold off to BlackRock and JP Morgan.
Right.
And Trump is like, that's great. Let's do more of that. So this has been happening in the last several conflicts. It's about going into these specific areas, blowing everything up, destroying everything, destroying people's lives, and then coming back in to quote unquote build back better and install these 4 IR cities on the ruins. Right. And to think that couldn't happen elsewhere, I mean it's disturbing. I mean, it's basically the message that's being sent is implement these systems voluntarily, or we will bomb you until you build back better. It's the 4 B's now: bombs, build back better,
or any very, very Big Beautiful Bill came out as well, like really just shoving it in your face, making the overlap. But I think what's clear is, as you pointed out, the coercion part of this. But it's not even just the bombs. It's, as we see with some of the more amenable countries that maybe don't want to go directly in that direction, it becomes sort of do this, or we're going to find an investigation somehow of your government, or suddenly we're going to remove fuel that you need, or these just dishonest tactics across the world today, just coercing people into this direction, and so, and interesting that I'm glad this is becoming something that's getting more discussion, because I think it's very clear that this is what we've all worried about. Let me ask you this then too. Do you think Trump is aware of that? Do you think he's consciously aware of this agenda, or is he being used in that way?
I don't think it matters. He's the apprentice host of this dystopian reality we're living.
I agree with that.
He's there to be the public face, the reality TV face of all of this. I don't think he's making the decisions.
I don't either. But the reason that's important, I think, is because I wonder if that, with what we know about him, I mean, you could read his books, you can understand he is clearly the same person he's always been. He's very narcissistic.
Yeah. And in The Art of the Deal, that whole idea comes from Roy Cohn, his mentor. Again, go back to my books out almost 4 years ago. Right. Which was all about the whole idea of Art of the Deal is backdoor deals with shady organized crime figures about how to make more money for the billionaires.
Right. Well,
what do you think Trump's deals are about?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so if you have a person like that who is being manipulated and is allowed to think he's in control, right? That's how I would read that.
But Jared Kushner comes and is like, tank your whole base and make voters hate you in the middle of a major affordability crisis, and invade Iran, please. And Trump is like, oh, you say clap, I will clap like a seal.
Okay,
to Jared Kushner, to his son-in-law. Do you think this is the guy that's really running shit, and he's like in charge of what's happening in his government? He works for the transnational, let's call it a corporation. That's really what it is.
Right.
And what's telling, I mean, I really like to point out this quote to people because I think it's very revealing in how long this has been going on. In the early 1970s, Samuel Pisar, who's Anthony Blinken's stepfather, but also was Robert Maxwell's super best bud and lawyer and close friend, and part of that whole mob nexus of which Maxwell was, part and helped build. So the same Epstein network we're talking about, but well before Epstein, obviously, because this is the 70s. Samuel Pisar testified before Congress about the rise of what he called the trans-ideological corporation. And what he described that as is the multinational Western corporation is going into joint ventures with all of the state-owned companies, not all of, but a lot of the state-owned companies in communist countries. And what they're doing is creating an economic structure that is making the nation state irrelevant. Right. And that this is what is running the world now.
And you were saying this is back
and he told this in the early 70s, and he told this in front of the US Congress. And someone was like, so do you think this is bad? He was like, not necessarily, I mean, it's the most in your face thing ever. This is the Nixon era.
Right. That long a plan, it seems, at least the transition away from something that they realized.
Well, I mean,
their power.
After Nixon, who came in? It was Jimmy Carter, right? Or no, there was Gerald Ford in there, but he wasn't elected. And I think Rumsfeld served in his government the first time, right? So it's obvious who he was. But then you have Carter, who's full of trilateral commission people, basically his whole administration run by that. You have Reagan, which is really Papa Bush, that does Iran-Contra in the Franklin scandal, and like all of these, Promise, all of these insane crimes, BCCI, which actually started in the 70s with the CIA back then. And then, the 90s, you have Bush Sr., Clinton, but I mean, it's a constant progression of this club.
Right.
All these politicians are owned by them. And, back in the 70s, people thought leaders actually ran things. And then this guy told Congress, no, it's these corporations, and they fused with the corporations of the communist bloc. And this is what's running the world now. I think.
So go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Well, I think if you look at it, it's very obvious that's the case. I think the whole idea that multipolarity is a real thing, that like China and Russia offer any real challenge to this end game that the West is having. of going to technocracy. It's very obvious that they've all adopted it themselves, and China's the model for it.
Mm. So it's an interesting.
So China's going to save us from a model it helped perfect? No.
Right.
In Russia's full steam ahead on CBDCs and digital ID and all of this stuff, like, you're not escaping it by cheering on foreign countries that you think are nominal U.S. adversaries. And it's a convenient narrative for building infrastructure of the prison, or if you want to use Catherine's term, the digital control grid. Like right now, all this, the whole narrative about why we have to build AI mass surveillance in the United States and fill it with autonomous lethal drones is because China.
Right.
We have to beat China in the AI race. But the people that are building in Silicon Valley have tons of business interests in China. I mean, Elon Musk is a perfect example, but also Google, also Microsoft, like all of these guys.
It's the same on all these points.
And it's the same mob. Like, why was Epstein on the very important Microsoft Russia trip in 1998? And he's pictured in Russian classrooms with top Microsoft executives, presumably looking for young talent, with Nathan Myhrvold, who's the chief technology officer of Microsoft. I mean, I don't know. That is the Transnet ideological corporation right there. You know,
right.
It's like they're all, the corporations run everything, but who runs them? It's this oligarchy.
Right. And the point is, you can see that kind of hypocrisy, the blindness from all these, like Larry Fink being very close to Trump's inner circle, but yet BlackRock
was his money manager.
Right. But they're still framed by the people that support him as sort of like the bad, evil thing. Jones will do a whole expose on how bad BlackRock is, but it's such a weird deviation. But what you're really,
but Larry Fink advised Trump's entire economic response to COVID.
Right.
Stephen Mnuchin called him like 19 times in like a very short span.
It's
just like, Larry, what do I do? Oh, okay. I destroy the economy. Gotcha. So you can buy it. Great.
Yeah. Well, I just find it really interesting that what you're describing is hypothetically the idea that the communist elements are essentially driving the change of our society, and that's being supported by the people claiming they're fighting those things. It's just what that really speaks to is the idea that all of what we deal with in the world is somewhat a show. And I think we really should be concerned at this point.
I mean, all the fear mongering about communist China. China has a ton of billionaires. They're an authoritarian capitalist society.
Right.
They don't hate capitalism. Are you kidding me?
I mean, and then Catherine will call Trump the most anti-capitalist president in history, and there's plenty of points to be made about what they're doing behind the scenes. It's just an interesting time to stand back and question all of what we're looking at. And again, that's why I think this is sort of this transition that's taking place, because people are just kind of waking up from it all. We're tired of this. It's been one cycle after another, and I think people are just starting to see it,
Yeah, well, I think the Epstein files have been good for revealing, at least to some people, the nature of how things really function, and that there's a group operating above the visible group, but there could easily be groups operating above that. We just don't have the visibility into it.
Right.
But stop thinking that this is something you're going to resolve only at the ballot box. If you want to spend one day every 4 years voting because you think it's important, I don't care. Right. That's fine. But if you think that's the only thing you need to do, I really don't agree with you. I think there's a lot that everyone needs to do personally, like try and shore up their local communities, or like develop, if you don't want to participate in this digital currency crap, build local community and try and develop your own parallel economy with people close to you. I don't know. I mean, there's not a lot of easy solutions to these problems. And that's because for many decades, people have not spoken up when they should have. Mm-hmm. And things were swept under the rug. And then, back in the day, people were killed to keep, certain information from becoming public. I think now they just can algorithmically bury it, or smear people, or delete people's accounts and disappear them online. Now that all discourse is online, it's a little bit of a different game. But yeah, it's, people will have to make hard choices with what's coming. And we should be talking about, people should openly acknowledge that, instead of being like, don't listen to those negative Nancys. This can be solved by voting for JD Vance in 2028.
It's coming, but I think
all these people that are like off the Trump train now will hop on the Vance or Rubio or whatever train it is in a few more years.
But mark my words, it will be noticeably less. And I think
hopefully so. We can only hope.
I think we're seeing it right now. And I think it's noticeably less that are, I think they can see that these agendas, like I was joking about this the other day, and this has happened before with this topic, but I see it in others too. But they basically come out for the 15th time and go, aliens are real. And we're like, whatever, let's get to the next story. It's like, we still believe you right now.
They're going to throw the kitchen sink at everybody if they feel like they're losing control. So that's what the alien thing, I think, has just been kind of simmering there.
I agree.
Sorry, I don't want to trust the department of the U.S. government that just blew up an Iranian girls' school because it listened to the wrong fucking AI about aliens. I'm sorry, I don't really trust what they have to say about aliens.
Right.
They're war criminals. I don't trust them. If anything, they probably work with the aliens. If they're real, I don't know. Like, it's just ridiculous. I just think it's a huge distractionary thing, and they try and back to what we were saying about leaks based journalism and how the Twitter files was meant to manipulate that. I think a lot of times, and even to an extent with some of the Epstein files, even, it's to keep our eyes off of other things. And so when they release, so when the Epstein files, I don't know if you remember, was getting inconvenient for the Trump administration a few months ago, Pete Hegseth was like, we're going to release the UAP files.
Right, exactly.
The alien files, we're going to release them. And then you can pour over that on the internet while we literally destroy your world and eat your money.
It happens every time. There's some level of kind of reactionary. Right now, the mainstream alternative media kind of does it for them with every, whatever else they want to point to. But I'll include for the show notes and for the podcast a great article written by Kevork Amassian from Syrian Analysis, which he was just kind of getting on touching on what you were highlighting there, is this growing awareness of like the real function, the way our societies actually function, and it's not government. There's something above all of this, and whether, as you said, it goes even more layers above that, it's that the people are just finally starting to go, okay, I'm seeing what you're talking about, right? It's like, or people that had read your books a long time ago, and like I was saying, just had trouble kind of, there's so much information, are now beginning to see it themselves, and they go, okay, now I can see exactly.
Well, the reason my work is so info dense is, one, when I go on an interview to talk about them, and people, I used to get the criticism that there's not enough sourcing, like you're saying stuff, but where are your sources? Read my written stuff if you want the sources, that's why it's there. But now I have people being like, I can't read an article. I know some of my articles are long, but even if I write one that's like 20 minutes, people are like, or 10 minutes, what are the key takeaways? Or like, Brock, what is this article about?
Yeah, it's frustrating, but I think it needs to be long. And this is the reason my shows are like, these things are not something you can, if you want headlines and talking points, there's plenty of people out there repeating discussions, but that's necessary for some people that don't have time. But to understand these things and not just repeat points, but to understand them and be able to articulate and discuss, you need the long form conversation. You need a Whitney Webb. It's important, and I think most people are very much aware of that today. Well, let's end with just generally speaking the Iran points on this, where I don't know how much time you left, just a couple more minutes we can touch on Iran to wrap up here.
What's the time, your time right now?
2:32 for me.
Okay.
Time change. Well, I'm just on the way out.
The US just had a time change, and Chile has its own daylight savings. So I'm like, oh my God, what time is it?
I'm so frustrated with the daylight savings times. Daylight savings time. But all I was going to end with was just, we'd already discussed really, but the point was that we have examples of Marines now being deployed, right? And the argument more about guiding ships through the path. But look, I argue that we know there are boots on the ground and have been long before this. And I think that's very clear now from a lot of different angles. But now we actually have the Marines headed to the Middle East conversation. And that's for Israel, guys. That's not even debated. It's clear what they're telling you they're trying to do right now. And I think right now it's obvious this is all kind of coming down. People are starting to see through this. I don't know if anybody can tell know for sure which side's effectively winning, all that kind of stuff. But I think it's worth questioning a lot of this. And I'm of the mind right now that the way that they set this up, the way that they, almost set themselves up to fail, quite frankly. And what I think that's driving from, that ultimately I think it's Iran playing the long game. I think we can see that slowly starting to become clear with the weapons transactions they're doing and so on. But just overview from your opinion, where do you see this going, in regard to Iran? Do you think this is, if you have any thoughts on it all, just let me know if you think that that's going to continue, it's going to stop. What do you think?
I mean, it could go one of two ways, obviously. And I'm not really, I just want to be really honest. I'm not really sure how it could play out. Like I said earlier, I think if the US succeeds in what it's trying to do there, Gaza is the absolute model for what the US and Israel hope to install. It's been very clear that Trump he's already said, plans to select the new leader. They've claimed anyway that they've intentionally targeted any sort of leadership candidate of Iran, since this started. But also, military assessments going back, over the several iterations we've had of, Netanyahu getting in front of the UN with like the red bomb diagram being like, they're this close to a bomb, we should invade, the US should invade, all of that. I mean, that's been going on a long time. And assessments back then, pointed to how Iran is much more difficult to invade than, Iraq, for example. And that, it both for geographical reasons and political reasons, so the idea that it was going to be solved just by like a week of, aerial bombings, if the goal really was to, install a US Israeli puppet, I mean, it makes sense that it would eventually move to a different phase. I hate that it's happening. It's just so annoying to me because so many people that were like anti-neocon cheerleaded this administration on and acted like a vote for Trump was the anti-neocon vote. And it's just so frustrating because if you looked at the first administration, should have been clear, he does what Sheldon Adelson wants for the foreign policy angle. And now Sheldon is dead and Miriam is there. And it's the same crap. And, a lot of innocent people are getting blown up. And, our government is obviously doing it. They're complicit. And behind them are the big tech warlords, like Peter Thiel, chairman of Palantir. I know people have tried to downplay his involvement. Yes, he dumped some shares. As far as I know, he's still chairman of the board and has been, and he created that company.
Influence.
And
back then.
Yeah, and Palmer Luckey of Anduril, who is like mad that like Wired says he's like a bad person in Silicon Valley. Yeah, you're a fucking warlord, dude.
Right.
And you're taking humans out of, I mean, think about how many war crimes the US committed in Iraq and Afghanistan, and like people went to prison for revealing them. And that was when there was only human oversight. Imagine the world that people like Palmer Luckey are building, where they want it to be 100% autonomous and AI regularly hallucinates. And we know that the Pentagon under Trump has been using AI to pick who to target. And American AIs were chosen to, used to choose targets in Gaza. Right. And look what happened there.
That's the model right there.
And in the Iranian girls' school, I mean, this is, it's so criminal. It's hard to describe. It's hard to even really wrap your mind around without just feeling sick to your stomach. And I just, I hate this is where we're at. In the COVID era, I had so much hope that people would figure out that these people were bad. And here we are. And, I don't know. Mass murder is not the solution. And the whole model that we talked about earlier of it's coercion or it's bombing, and it's leading us all to, all the pressuring national governments around the world to adopt these systems that are going to be used to impose techno-feudalism. So we're not just ceding national sovereignty formally. The goal is to have us cede our sovereignty, even the sovereignty over our own bodies, if this gets far along enough. It's being done by blowing children and innocent people to bits. and it's sick. And I think people that think these bombings are a good thing are either heavily propagandized or sociopathic at this point.
I agree entirely. But to end with the, like the positive point that I do very much see in this, and it's not just trying to, be like wishful thinking, is that I agree with you that, there's been ups and downs and letdowns for sure. But this last transition has been different, at least from my perspective. And from the time I've been doing this, and I very much do feel, and I hope, I hope I'm not wrong, let's have hope for where it goes, but that people are genuinely in a different place than they were over the last few times. And I think the COVID-19 timeframe had a very big effect on that. But I think October 7th, more than anything forward, the way they handled that, I think it changed the entire game. And I think now I'm hoping that we're going to see this start to change in that degree. I mean, there's always going to be new agendas, new lies, new QAnons and Russiagates and whatever else. But I think there people are more on guard than ever to that. And that's hopefully with us here and out, everybody out there doing this in an objective way, that we will see a positive change if we keep fighting this. And I'd like to believe we have that opportunity right now. So put a little bit of a positive note on it. I really do think that.
Yeah. Thanks for the positive spin. Sorry, I just really don't like war. And so I think it's very, ugh.
Yeah.
I hate that it's happening, and I hate that this was so preventable. Exactly. And it was and the administration is just treating it like it was just like, oh, well, my son-in-law walked through the door and yeah, why not?
Yeah. They're so obviously trapped in this, at least at the very least, because they don't want us to see who's actually calling.
Well, they don't want to admit it, but this is why the Trump administration, when they chose their cabinet, they put in people that were like either TV show hosts or like popular podcast influencers. It was people who had trust with the base. And so when they delivered the message of we're invading Iran, they would be like, that's fine. Right. Tulsi Gabbard's anti-war. So if she says we have to go to war with Iran and we do it and blah, blah, blah.
Right. That was why they wanted to
means we have to.
Gabbard's their token, and I'm sure she sees that about herself right now, or maybe she's never been genuine, but like a massy.
I don't trust any of these people, so
we shouldn't question. We should question all of them all the time. That's what we do, right? We have to. Like even like I said with a Massey, like I'll continue to point out like his consistency thus far in this conversation, but I will probably never. I mean, I don't think we ever should trust.
My biggest worry about someone like Thomas Massey is if they wanted to try and do the hopium thing in 2028, they would tack him on a ticket, and maybe they would make him a lot of promises. Maybe he, maybe he really is a genuine guy, but the idea that we can only fix this at the ballot box, I don't think is true. Exactly. And you could hoodwink a lot of people into thinking that is true if you were to run someone like him, or, some people have hypothesized a bipartisan Ro Khanna Massey ticket.
Yeah. Waiting for that.
Yeah. Like, so I would, again, it's important. The people who are building trust right now, even if it's through accurate reporting, you got to pay attention to the potential misdirection that's coming at the end. Because a lot of these people that are building trust right now are lifting the work of others to build that trust, or at least building off of it and not really citing it. I mean, that's not just true for Epstein. That's true for some digital currency reporting and and other things that are going on right now. So as a result, the amount of people I trust in alt media has dwindled. Wow. A lot, but it is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, it's at least we can, I mean, I agree with you. And I think a lot of people are getting there, but I think right now the questioning is important. So I'm glad that that's where people are getting to. So thank you for joining.
No, I can't complain about it. No, I still have 10 minutes.
Okay.
You were trying to wrap up.
Yeah. Well, no, let's get into one more point then. So let's,
well, we didn't talk a ton about my article. So if you don't mind, I'll give people the quick,
go back to it. Yeah.
Brief rundown. So I think all we really established, I got like on a tangent there. Sorry about the earlier iterations of the series. It is a thing that happens when we are on the same stream, Ryan. Right. I don't know. Years of practice. But yeah, so basically we already established, right, that the torture video redacted Sultan guy that the Trump administration was protecting is one of the subjects of this article. As you can see there he is. He was a business partner of Trump. Trump's first involvement in the United Arab Emirates, first business venture. was with a company Suliem controlled called Nakheel, and they were going to build Trump Tower Dubai. And it only fell apart because of the 2008 financial crisis, because Andrew Farkas and most likely Jeffrey Epstein had them create a secondary mortgage market, which parked a bunch of money in the Cayman Islands and created all this crazy mortgage-backed security crap that exploded in 2008. Obviously in the United States in a huge way, but also in Dubai, completely thanks to the system that Andrew Farkas built at the same time he was hanging around Epstein, who had also helped park Bear Stearns' toxic mortgage debt in an offshore vehicle in the exact same timeline. So very interesting there.
But it's insane.
Yeah. But this is a fraction of what I talk about in this. And so I want to bring, so basically the reason it's titled this way was because Andrew Farkas was instrumental in Epstein establishing the system he had in the USVI, particularly the marina he used to establish his private telecommunications connections, including the surveillance cameras that were likely used to blackmail people on the island. All to point back to this marina that Andrew Farkas co-owned with Epstein. And Epstein, we don't know how much money either of them paid for it, by the way. But they were co-owners, and Epstein also had two of his businesses parked there, a financial trust company, which later turned into Southern Trust Company, and it employed the wife of the USVI prime minister at the time that Epstein moved his primary base of operations to be in the USVI. And she was a huge fixer for him. And those companies were tied to criminal activity in these past USVI lawsuits that were settled out of court. And what he wanted to do with one of those companies was recruit teens from the USVI and have them run all the AI servers of the company for it. It was like a financial algorithmic AI trading firm, and also involved in like biomedical algorithmic stuff. And he wanted kids to run it, which is weird when you're dealing with someone like Epstein, who's both a pedophile and a transhumanist. And she was helping Epstein get student visas for trafficked girls at a USVI university that they weren't actually attending. So what do you think she also did while her father was husband was prime minister? I can't believe I'm saying prime minister governor. USVI is a U.S. territory. I'm sorry. I will get rid of these mistakes at some point when I'm back in the flow of interviews a little bit more. Sorry about that.
No worries.
But it's very messed up. And actually, the governor in question had to resign because he got caught in this corruption embezzlement scandal that intimately involved people from like the Obama and Clinton spheres. Which is interesting. And there's a really good article by Corey Diggs that I cite in here for more information about that specifically. It's very crazy. But in addition to that, you have the Ben Sulayem angle. And it's important. The reason Farkas and Ben Sulayem are both included here is because they're longtime business partners. They go everywhere together. Since like 2002, when they were introduced by a close friend of Trump named Sol Kerzner, who is part of the South African, real estate hotel dynasty that have a lot of suspect connections, as noted in the piece. But Ben Sulayem, as I mentioned earlier, was basically in control of a huge portfolio dealing with freight and also, marinas and ports around the world. And Farkas also controls an insane amount of marinas, mainly for large yachts around the world. And one of the reasons he got in the yachting business was because billionaires with giant yachts like Leslie Wexner and his yacht, the Limitless, had boats that were so big they couldn't go into existing marinas. So his marinas serve in particular this upper class with their giant ass boats, and they're connected to traffickers. Okay. And so the Ben Sulayem guy, if you look at his recent releases with Epstein, he's talking about, and Farkas too, they're talking about, trading masseuses and the girls, and Farkas was photographed on a yacht with Epstein, Jean-Luc Brunel, and women who were most likely trafficked, knowing what Brunel and Epstein did together. And in Ben Sulayem, in his communications about women and the torture video, I mean, it's very clear that something very dark was going on between these men. But beyond that, you have to look at what they controlled. Mm-hmm. And that they also have this background in criminal activity, and also Epstein's own past in criminal activity. And as I noted earlier, what was Epstein doing? He was smuggling and moving stuff around. It went from weapons, it went to women, but he basically, he also corrupted and cultivated a lot of customs officers, both in Florida and in the USVI. He could move anyone or anything anywhere.
Right.
And Farkas and Ben Sulayem could help him do it. And they have a track record of doing that, and they are not being investigated, and they absolutely should be, because they're clearly big parts of this. And Farkas will not be investigated. Why? Because he's the money behind a lot of the Kushner family business, going back to Jared Kushner, and how Kushner is often a front. If you, they use other people's money to buy the buildings they manage, so they're completely dependent on people wealthier than them for the real estate business they conduct. And one of those people is Andrew Farkas, specifically his company C3 Capital Management, which there's emails now about Farkas trying to get Epstein involved with C3 Capital Management. So, this is something that I think is really significant. And there's obviously a lot of connections I'm leaving out here. So going back to, the Obama-Clinton ties to the USVI scandal and all of that, well, Andrew Farkas is intimately tied up with the Democratic Party in fundraising. He's the whole reason Andrew Cuomo was ever anything ever after he left being head of the Department of Housing and Development under the Clinton administration. So governor, mayor, all of that, Andrew Cuomo's money for that. And in several campaigns, his campaign finance chairman was Andrew Farkas. So you look into Farkas, it's not good for Dems. And it just underscores how this is a huge bipartisan issue.
Well, this is the deep state or the unelected power structure, the shadow government argument that's being ignored. Well, I guess the Republicans blame the Democrats, or however they want to frame this in a partisan way. Like, that's what that looks like, that never-ending influence, whichever side.
Yeah. And so one of the craziest part of this article, it actually ties into a very forgotten about national security scandal that happened in the Bush administration, because there were many of them. But basically, the Bush administration tried to give Dubai Port World complete control over the biggest ports in the United States. And it was supposed to be investigated, or at least the federal government was supposed to conduct oversight investigations, and top Bush officials waived them all secretly. And one of them was the Treasury Secretary at the time, John Snow, who now works for Steve Feinberg, who incidentally is number 2 at the Pentagon after Hegseth, and I would argue is actually running the Pentagon, not Pete Hegseth. It's the Cerberus capital management guy, Steve Feinberg, who's Deputy Secretary of War. He's the one actually running this. He employs John Snow now. And this story also significantly involves the Carlyle Group. And so and Epstein had a lot of ties to them, and they have a lot of ties to the Bush family and also the bin Ladens. And the bin Laden's business interests also intersect with the HUD fraud that was going on that I know Catherine Austin Fitts has talked a lot about. But Farkas intimately involved in that crowd. He made bank in the 90s on HUD fraud. And actually was involved in the effort to nuke Catherine's company, Hamilton Securities, from removing fraud from HUD. So this is the same crowd, and it's the Bush-Reagan crowd, the Iran-Contra crowd. It makes perfect sense that he and Epstein would be swimming around each other. But anyway, while the negotiations with the Dubai Port World and the Bush administration were going on, Sulayem and Farkas were meeting with Epstein. They are in the front row of the Victoria's Secret fashion show with Leslie Wexner, Abigail Wexner, and Jeffrey Epstein. So they obviously met before then. You don't have your first meeting in the front row of that. They were invited to be the VIPs of that. And you bet that they were discussing the most pressing thing on Ben Sulayem's mind at the time, that DP World deal to take over U.S. ports. And there was a huge pushback from people in Congress. Yeah, this picture is crazy.
Yeah.
There's Russell Simmons in the back, who's part of the whole like Diddy, Brett Ratner thing. I don't know. It's nuts. Yeah. But that's clearly not their first meeting. This is November 2005. So before this, the earliest they were believed to have met was like over a year later in 2006. But no, they were meeting while the DP World stuff was actively going on in the Bush administration, despite the protests of Congress. being, because they were upset about it over 9/11 stuff, because the 9/11 Commission like linked financing for the attacks to the UAE and also Saudi Arabia, right? So so they were mad about ports being handed over to the UAE for that reason. And this is not that many years after 9/11. So obviously, the pull of that event was still really strong for the American public. And Bush basically went in the face of that in the middle of the war on terror and was like, no, if you try and prevent this with legislation, I will veto it. I mean, it went really far, and the Bush administration tried really hard to protect this. And one of the people that tried really hard to protect it, it wasn't just George Bush himself. It was Alberto Gonzales, the attorney general at the time. And according to Nick Bryant, the only people that could have told Alex Acosta and the people prosecuting Epstein in Florida in 2006, 2007 for the sex trafficking and in his involvement, with minors. The reason he was told to stand down could have only been, or the only person per Nick Bryant that can tell a U.S. attorney, a district attorney to stand down is the attorney general or the president. So it was one of those two people. And having Epstein involved in the circles around this deal, advising these guys, and he went on to advise them for many years. I mean, this is a very close relationship with Suliam and Farkas that may have had an influence actually to an extent on the decision not to prosecute Epstein, and should absolutely be revisited. And another angle to that is all the Carlyle Group connections, because there's a lot of ties of the Carlyle Group to all of these people in question. It's been called the CIA of the business world. David Rubenstein, who runs it, had ties to Epstein. His wife for many years was very, very close to Epstein and also to Ghislaine Maxwell. So, there's a lot to be said, there. So if you're interested in how Epstein may have intersected with the Bush administration, you're interested in learning how Trump first got involved with the United Arab Emirates and with who, which is actually pretty important, because a lot of the big conflicts of interest that have popped up in the second administration have been around the UAE, right? With like World Liberty Financial and some of those like obvious conflicts of interest there. Like they put a bunch of money into Trump family ventures or Witkoff family ventures in the case of World Liberty Financial. And then the UAE was allowed access to closely guarded AI chips. It's an obvious, Trump is an obvious pay to play presidency. And it's crazy because a lot of Trump voters were outraged at the pay to play of Hillary Clinton and the Clinton Foundation. But I guess this is fine, even though it's probably, honestly, more brazen than that even. It's kind of nuts. But yeah, so this article goes into all of that. And, if you want to learn about the guy who's behind Andrew Cuomo, who you may remember from the COVID era and all sorts of other things, or the recent New York mayoral race, this is the article for you. But at the end of the day, it shows that a lot of these logistics firms that are essential to moving cargo around the world and port security, and how customs officers can very easily be corrupted by these people. It's very clear that not only was Epstein utilizing a network like this, but all the people in his network could have called on these guys via Epstein.
Right. That's what it seems like, that this was sort of just a one part, as you've always pointed out. This was, I think you said in this interview, that he was just a part in this, not some kind of leader, that this is one element of a larger network. And then, diplomatic immunity involved with that as well, with the process there. So much that's just very clearly the vessel, the funnel for what they might be trafficking or using in any possible way, or clandestine operations. Anything like that's, they can hide effectively anything with that setup.
Yeah, they if they're able to control most of the marinas and and industrial ports in the world, they can move anything anywhere. And there's a lot of examples of Epstein very successfully doing that in the 80s and 90s, particularly the 90s, which very few people for some reason want to look into. And as it relates, a lot of the people that have popped up to talk about Epstein have noted the BCCI ties or the arms trafficking in the 80s ties, but they're seemingly very uninterested in what he was trafficking in the 90s with the help of Leslie Wexner in Southern Air Transport, the CIA airline that moved to Columbus, Ohio, specifically for Leslie Wexner's The Limited.
Clearly, you're
Anyway,
suggesting that there's a pulling of a punch there because of it connects to certain people. Is that what you're
connects to Israel and connects to China. So,
right.
uh-oh.
Well, I'll leave you with this one thought point since you brought this up, and I think it's interestingly kind of makes.
I do have to go in 2 minutes though, so let's wrap up here.
Trump offers donors access to national security briefings if they're willing to basically pay their way in. National security briefings. This country's been sold out to the highest bidder a long time ago.
Yeah, you can buy citizenship. You can be from any country in the world. You can buy citizenship through his like gold visa thing that he's so proud of, and then you can pay more money and get access to national security briefings.
Insane. Well, Whitney.
Oh, we're doing all this to stop China, Ryan. It's all of our freedoms and all normal laws we have to suspend to stop those guys. It's, right. I mean, it's just, yeah.
I mean, I think this has been clear today, and I hope this can build for people out there. Thank you, Whitney. Hope we'll talk again soon, and hope everybody's listening because this is still happening. Is there any final words before we wrap up?
No, just stay tuned for a lot of cool stuff this year from Unlimited Hangout, new video shows, new articles. We'll have a new one coming out really soon about Leslie Wexner that is very spicy, and a new print magazine in a couple of months.
Outstanding. All right.
I don't know if you could see my thumbs up. It was just the thumb.
Well, thank you for tuning in today. As always, everybody out there, question everything. Come to your own conclusions. Stay vigilant.